Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Rickard. Can you hear me okay? All right. We're going to talk about hunting for Phish kits, and I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. Yes, that is. Oh, you are not seeing that. One sec. You're not seeing that? Yeah. All right. So, yeah. My name is Josh Rickard. We're going to be talking about hunting for Phish kits, and that is me underneath that mask. So. But my background, I started in IT, went over to, help desk to sysadmin or system support to sysadmin, and then went into DFIR. Digital forensics, and then did that for a while, created a lot of open source tools, and then went to become a product manager at a phishing defense company. And then now I'm a security research engineer at Swimlane, which is a SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response company. So totally enough about me. All right, let's talk about how we're actually going to be hunting Phish kits. Before we actually hunt them, we need to understand what they are, right? And we need to have a baseline of what these kind of these attacks are. So they're really just deployable apps or deployable templates or applications that you can just upload to a compromised host, a new host, and they're usually contained in a .zip file. And they contain a whole bunch of attributes, and we'll go through those a little bit. But they're really just a set of tools an attacker can deploy and off to go. They'll have some configuration and some other items that we'll talk about, but for the most part, it's just like a template and a whole bunch of code. So, you can buy these kits, and a lot of these kits are made by different attackers or groups, and they're sold. So this one is actually fudspam.tools. It's not behind Tor or anything, so you can go Google it right now and go and buy an Office 365 kit for $70. And, these are kits are then, created, prepackaged, and then other less technical scammers will actually use them, configure them, and start actually attacking. So there's a couple different aspects where you have, the makers themselves, as well as the actual attackers. And so here's an example. This was August 25th was it updated for an Office attachment page that you can fish with for $70. It's weird that they actually don't take Bitcoin, but anyways. And they do, funny thing is they do have a built-in chat support for this tool. Yeah. So let's take a look at one traditional kit. Everyone sees kind of a PayPal. There's a bunch of, the big companies, Apple, PayPal, whatever it is. Obviously, this is not an actual PayPal site. It's agentreview.net/login, whatever. But, they have the traditional feel. But once you actually, the attacker has uploaded this zip or this kit, then they just extract it on this page, and then you get a brand new website just like this. But when you actually, download that kit when you're hunting, you can expand it, and this is kind of the traditional view. You'll see they'll have a whole bunch of code. Most common is probably PHP. There is some JavaScript, some HTML, CSS, but for the most part, they're just going to they love PHP. I hate PHP, but it works. So when they actually, have uploaded this kit and they have extracted it, then they need to configure it, the user, the less technical scammer. As you can see, they do have to configure it, and there's nice comments that they leave, which is great. But the attacker or the less technical will just put in their email address and off they go. But they also, the kit makers themselves, and this is becoming way more common I'm seeing, is they'll actually backdoor those kits. So, they're selling them to, some person in some internet cafe somewhere, and they're actually, backdooring by having these obfuscated, encoded strings that actually are emails. A great example is this, that they'll just have this, I think it's base 64 and then rot and then GZ inflate and rot 13 and yeah. But if you actually decoded this, it's actually the form questions that were there for the kit that the user needed to fill out, as well as they're sending to 3 different other email addresses. And those are the actual kit makers. And it's just really weird that you have 3 mail functions, and some of this is not obfuscated sometimes. Sometimes it's just plain text, and they still they don't know, and they don't look at it. I like to think of this as the scammers are actually scamming the scammers. It's a weird situation because I just thought this was a weird photo. It has nothing really to do with it. I was Googling and was like, oh, this is weird. No, they have these kids and they're actually backdooring it. So they'll send off, that means, hey, I'm going to sign up. You're going to pay me $70. I'm going to download your kit. I'm going to configure it. But next time the user clicks on a link, goes and fills out their information, the kit makers are getting the information immediately, as well as the configured users. So they're really kind of, they're like the big shark of the water, they're scamming everyone, and it's great. So some other attributes is that they embed images into these, so they purposely don't want to call back to the original site where those images are hosted. But they also want compatibility. A lot of them will have mobile sites, and they're very well designed. I don't want to say well designed. They're not coding wizards by any means, but it's pretty interesting. But they're also like confirmation pages. So when you sign into PayPal, but then you need to actually transfer money and you get the confirmation, sites, you don't have access traditionally to those images, those raw text. So they actually and put those in there, just kind of make it have that full traditional feel. And they also include these HT access files. These are really just a whole bunch of IPs, IP CIDR blocks that they'll actually use to block. And they'll keep adding to them and keep adding to them and keep adding to them. But they also, if you're a user agent, if you're a Google bot or some other bot trying to scrape them, they'll actually redirect you to another site. They're pretty efficient, but some of these are thousands and thousands of lines they just keep adding to. They're just like, I hate you, and we'll see that. But they also have a robots.txt. So if anyone's traditional, web app or whatever, you will actually have this robots.txt, which basically blocks access to certain directories or certain areas. Plus, they'll also use it for user agent, redirecting. And the funny thing, though, is they also have these scripts that they call anti-bot, or bots.php, whatever it is. And this one, which is by the Shadow Z118 group, will actually include, they have 6 of them, but they only actually include 4, and they're a huge list of IPs, of very specific IPs that they just hate. So this is an example of one of those scripts. You can see on line 50 and 62 that they, once you are identified as one of those bots, they will send you a 404 and a nice little message back to you. And you can get around this, but it's pretty funny. All right, so they also multi-language support, which is pretty interesting. So they're really trying to make this like a service, like a traditional, website, which is really interesting. But, there, I think on the left, it's, I think that's Spanish, and then French, and then English. But pretty interesting that they have multi-language. Again, they're not coding wizards by any means, but sometimes they kind of impress me a little bit. I mean, I hate to use the word impress, but I'm like, oh, good job. They actually do credit card validation to make that determination of what type of credit card it is, so they can send it off and have a quick little email summary of, here's the new MasterCards you just got, or here's the new Amex. Again, pretty cool. Logs. How many here actually have logging in their tools? I mean, you should, but not all the time, right? The great thing about some of these kits is full logging, meaning what and who and when things were accessed. as well as who entered what. Here you can actually see, this is Julian, this is my friend's drawing, it's amazing. But you can see that he was testing, and there's his client IP. And they just include that, and they leave it there. So this is great information for us, and we'll talk about that. Here's another example, right? You have the IP, the user agent string, the date timestamp. You can actually see that this is who visited your site, and they'll, if they enter credentials, they'll spit those out. So this will be really great resources for us as, defense. The best thing, though, of all of these kits is this. I mean, this should be in some museum. Like, this is pure art. Like, ASCII art gold. Like, if you're not appreciating the troll face and PayPal logos, I mean, this is amazing stuff. But the other great thing about these kits is they'll leave around their malware, right? Or tools, whatever it is, whether it's their back-end control panels or actual, exploits. I've seen, a lot of PowerShell, which is pretty normal now, but EXEs, DLLs, all the way down to APKs that they'll actually have downloaded. And so depends on, what the scope is. If you're trying to do credential harvesting or you're trying to actually exploit, you may find some juicy stuff. Yeah. So, okay, great, right? That's the basis of what these kits contain. They're just a lot of code. They have some interesting data points that we can actually use. But what do we actually do with this at this point? Cool, we know about this. But one of the biggest things that we all talk about is TTPs, right? And TTPs, they may not be, phishing sites are going to be, if you're getting a phishing website against your organization, this is like true verification that this is an attack and this is what they're actually doing. So if their tactics are, hey, I'm going to steal your credentials, or hey, I want to exploit a new vulnerability. Whatever it is, you actually, can dive down into those tactics or dive into those techniques. Like, what are they doing? How are they actually exploiting it? Are they, what's the whole goal of this? And then you get down to the procedures. You can start, going down. Hey, are they, exploiting a new vulnerability, an existing vulnerability? Are they dropping C2? So on and so forth. But by identifying this, we can actually use these kits. Well, we can use these kits to actually start identifying some of these exploits against this. Also, the IOCs are not dead, in my opinion. IOCs are still extremely valuable, especially for their active defense, right? Long term, we want TTPs, we want to block the entire actors, but if shit hits the fan, we need to respond. And part of that response is whether it's, blocking IPs, tracking data, going hunting, whatever it is, you still need to use these IOCs. And so there's some great information in some of these kits, like the kit name, versions, so you can actually track that over time, which is really, really interesting. Email addresses. So a lot of these are going to be Yandex and, a bunch of Gmail, lots of Gmail. But, you can actually track, and some of them keep them for many, many years. You can just do a Google search for that email address, and you'll see it pop up in images of the individuals as well, which is it's a whole other game. But you actually have logs, right? How many times do you actually have logs, and you can see when an attacker is actually, who is getting phished, and you can actually track that information. But you also have specific, hosting providers. You can grab detail about, okay, is this host very specific, known to have these certain types of kits or these certain versions, or is it kind of just a random exploit? And then we can actually, track all the variants. And one of the big things that we can do is track the individual, defensive measures that they add to those kits. So if they're trying to block your IP, your crawler, your user agent strings, whatever they are, you can actually start tracking and modifying your tools and become, kind of evasive if you have a history. Let's go and start actually catching some kits. I would hate to be that way. I mean, that's got to be heavy. So a little story though. I'm going to go in a little soapbox. I wish I actually had one, but okay. So back in like 2014, 2015, I open sourced the tool that it would actually report messages within Outlook, your mailbox, to your internal SOC. Then I worked for a phishing defense company that we actually made that product, or they made it, and we expanded it to a huge global audience. But my point is, if you do not have your users reporting phishing messages, you need to do this. Like, there's tons of commercial products, there's tons of open source products, whatever it is, you need to do this, because there's a lot of really cool information in here. We'll show you. So the typical response flow, right? User reports a message, goes to a centralized mailbox, we extract the attributes, we put in blocks and firewalls, proxies, we look up hashes, whatever it is, right? Great. I think there's a huge missing gap that we're not taking advantage of. And this is where we start actually hunting for these phish kits. We get these messages, we need to go and find out as much information about them as possible. One of the biggest attributes is if they do have logs, you know which one of your users have actually failed or clicked and entered that information. Plus, you have what kind of exploit is it? Were they trying to do a browser? Were they trying to do credential harvesting? Whatever. So your scope is already down further than just like wipe every machine. You actually have some great intel that you can use. So when you're actually hunting for these kits, there's a bunch of different ways, depending on your scope. If it's just your organization, use your own reported phishing messages. If not, then you want to get some pre-filtered sources or just raw sources. There's a bunch of them. There's OpenPhish, PhishTank, URL, Twitter. There's actually a really cool GitHub project called phishing.database. You should go check it out. There's a bunch of emails or a bunch of links in there. But then, if your scope is more broad and you want to actually have the raw sources, the internet, certificate transparency logs, great. It's going to be all, if anyone doesn't know what CTL is, then, well, let's talk. But who is domain search, which is actually all new domains added to all TLDs, as well as Pastebin, which I call dumpster fire, and Web Analyzer, which is, again, pretty similar to domain search, and then Firehole, which is like a correlation of like 4,000 blacklists, all into one nice fancy list that gets updated like every 2 minutes. So use those as your sources. It depends on what your scope is. So if your scope is just your org, use your messages. But if it's beyond, you can actually start correlating and grabbing some of these lists. Let's take Twitter, for example. There's a lot of hashtags out there that are used that people that are actually hunting for phish kits will add new kits almost immediately. Some of them are bot driven, some of them are, real user driven, but there are different types and the different formats and all that, which is hard to mess with. And some of these hashtags that I like to search for is OpenDir, which we'll talk about, but it's Open Directory, phish kit or phishing kit, or don't use a hashtag. There's a bunch of others as well. Here's an open directory. Everyone's probably seen one. You just probably didn't maybe know that it was called an open directory, but it's usually a title, and in the HTML code, the title will say index of, or contain the word index of, and it's a directory listing of all of your sites. Not all of them are enabled, some of them are. If they are, it makes our job a hell of a lot easier. But if they're not, we can still do some cool stuff. So one of the biggest things with like Twitter and other sources, you need to parse it all down first and actually take whatever formats that are seen and actually get it to a standard across all of those URLs. Then once we actually have that URL, then we begin our scraping, using personally in a project, so I'll show, but I use, Python requests, as well as Beautiful Soup and Mechanize, and there's a few other, packages and libraries that you can use. But the whole point is to request the content, ignore any, try to ignore any errors as much as possible. Just don't trust that they're saying 404, and download the content as much as possible. Parse the content, look for any A or href HTML tags. find any of those relative paths, meaning, so if you're in an href, you'll have a folder path, add them to a master list, and then just start adding .zip to each one of those as you expand. And just keep doing this recursively across every page that you encounter on that site. And then you just request content, and you just keep going back and forth. So this is an example of finding and generating paths, is the identify that route, download the content, but we're really just looking through, and you can see kind of in this GIF that, we're just expanding paths based on relative links that we found, and just keep going down that loop. All right, so tons of technology, right? We all have it. Anyone love SpongeBob? I love SpongeBob. As an adult, now I actually have a new daughter, and yeah, we love watching it. All right, so there's tons of open source tools out there. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. Fish and Catcher, so is a good one. Fish and Kit Hunter was another tool, as well as Stockfish, Fish Collect, Material, and Fish Finder. There's tons of them on GitHub that actually will help you, begin hunting. I do, these are great tools. I've used some of them. I've used bits and pieces of them. But I wanted to actually introduce a new tool that I'm releasing. It's not 100% done. There's some errors right now, so I plan on fixing it this weekend and next week. But this will be available, and it is one command that you would have to run. It's called Docker Compose Up, if you're not familiar with Docker. But each one's called Spotter, and Spotter is going out and actually based on a configuration file, like YAML config, we'll go and pull from all of these sources, plus I'll continue to add more. And what it does is say, okay, this is a new URL. I'm going to go and put it in a MongoDB, a document called Spotted, and as well as put it into Chum, which is a RabbitMQ, if anyone's interested in queues. And then Trawler is the one that actually pulls from that queue, and it expands vertically, horizontally, set of images that will actually go out and crawl. I'm adding Tor support as another container, as well as it rotates URLs, user agent strings. It rotates a whole bunch. There's a bunch of features in it. But then anything that it actually finds, we'll go and put it into Guts, which is a document as well. And that document will be all the actual raw core findings, the zips, the exes. The good thing about Trawler is that you'll actually be able to specify the extensions. So whether that's .log, no extension, .text, but let's say you want to ignore all HTML and PHP files, like you don't want to download those, then you just set them up there. Right now it's like 20 or something like that extensions that I support, but you can add more just by adding it to a config file. So that's it. This is, talking about FishKit. Hopefully the tool will be useful. If you have any questions, let me know. You can reach me on Twitter, GitHub. I have my personal blog, that's automate.it, and my work blog, and that's where the code will be. Cool. Thank you. Do you want me to share? Thank you so much.